Guys, before I jump into my introduction and the things that I have prepared, I'll be sharing a very basic PPT, and mostly I'll be talking around that. What I would not do is I will not jump into a lot of theory and a lot of product jargons, because I think each one of you is well versed with all those jargons and theories. You can get a subscription of Medium in about $5, and but here you're giving your hour here, which is definitely more expensive than that. So I'm sure you, with the internet and the vast learnings that the internet brings in, you guys anyways have access to a lot of knowledge and theory there. And like Aditya and Yash said, if you have any questions, keep shooting in there. If I'll be looking at that. And if you want me to elaborate on certain points, please shoot in there. If I wouldn't promise that I will be able to answer all of them, but I'll see whatever I could answer, I will. So I'll share my screen. Yeah, just a minute. Can you guys see the?
Yeah, we can see it.
And is it on the demo mode?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you guys still see the PPT?
No, it's in the presentation mode.
It is in the presentation mode,
it's in
right?
The presentation mode.
You guys can see the PPT.
Yeah.
Okay, the PPT is not gone, right?
No.
Yeah. So that's what I always say, that mankind has come to a point where we are talking about artificial intelligence and sending man to the moon, but we still don't have an answer to sharing screens and setting up beamers in the conference rooms. Anyways, hi, I'm Shantanu. I have been working since 2004 in this industry, IT, startups. I'll not take a lot of your time. Basically, I just wanted you guys to give an overview that I started my career with Reliance and then moved over to Siemens and Alcatel and Nokia. And in the year 2015, I moved over from the corporate side to the startup side. And well, I just wanted to talk about that a bit. I think a lot of people, budding product managers, engineers, and even people coming out of business schools, they want to go in for a startup because they think that's cooler. Possibly everybody has their own set of opinions about it, but I think the first 10 years of my life I've worked in a bigger corporates, and they've brought in a lot of sense and maturity to the way I think. They've also imbibed and re-stressed the point of bigger processes, how big machines move. But why I moved to the startup side was always the fact that, whatever I was doing in Alcatel, I never got to see whatever component I've been working on, how does that fit in the bigger machinery and how am I causing a dent in the universe? So I'm saying that you could be working anywhere in the industry. It's just your mindset. I possibly wanted to see products taking shape, companies taking shape, be more involved in changing the products and the way we do business, as well as the way we run teams in this country. So I moved over to the startup side, and I worked with Spoonjoy, and then Spoonjoy was acquired with Grofers, got an opportunity to do a lot of stuff in Grofers. And last year I joined this tech media company, Nuge. So I'll start with something which might be a bit boring for people. Yash and Adit, you can see the next slide, right?
Yeah, we can see.
Okay. So this is something called the SECs, which is the social economic classifications. this is how sometime in the mid 80s, the market research teams in India started to categorize the people in the Indian society based on their earning power and their occupation. This is largely how it is right now. So when you go to an e-commerce company or a social commerce e-commerce company, etc., people will be talking a lot in terms of, you know, SEC A1, SEC A2, SEC B, SEC C. So this is largely what the cost classification is. SEC A is your cream A1, and between A you have A1 and A2, and then you have SEC B, SEC C. So a large part of your SEC B is the middle class, but then you know, as in when you come to SEC C, that's where and SEC C2, that is where you keep hearing a lot of things that the next billion users are going to come from there, and the acquisition of the next billion users. Also, in terms of, you know, people keep talking about building product for Bharat versus India. So this is where the socio-economic classifications of this society come in. And I think as a person in the startup industry who's trying to build products or build businesses or make companies or run business, this is where the challenge for Indian ecosystem comes in. We have close to 30 mainstream languages being spoken. We have a wide variety of socioeconomic classifications, whereas even in middle class, if you see, only 2% children have access to English medium schools. And that's, while this might be a bit boring stuff, but this is the hard reality of people that you are going to sell your stuff or get your users on board. And that's where the problem of understanding them comes in. So these are the socioeconomic challenges. I've put the reference as well, where I've picked it up from. There's a lot of unemployment, poor educational standards, poor infrastructure, balance of payment deterioration, high levels of debt, blah, blah, blah. You will be able to find it anywhere, over the internet and all those things. So I wanted to keep this very anecdotal, and the things that how I learned about all these things. At certain point in my previous companies, we thought this was possibly in the year 2014, 2015, when internet industry was booming and there were a lot of startups being funded, a lot of food tech coming into play, a lot of e-commerce. Flipkart was going exponentially, and that's when you saw a lot of advent of companies with the second name as Cart. Basically, how do you know whom you are trying to sell for? How do you know that whom is your actual audience? Now, this question is easier said than done. I mean, for example, Grofers started as a marketplace service provider, marketplace grocery company, where it made your life easy with a lot of convenience. It brought your local marketplace, your ice cream walas, your local parchun ki dukaan, and even a modern trade outlet closer to you. But was that the main customer base that we were looking at? At certain point in time, Grofers made a very big pivot from the marketplace model to a self-inventory led model. And that's when the customer base of Grofers shifted from a very SEC A to a SEC B and C. As the founders of Grofers have mentioned it in various media releases, that it is the motorcycle class of India that actually gave us the growth. And that's what we realized, and we learned a lot of things, that what is important for them is actually not important for people in the upper SEC classes, whatever you want to sell. So yeah.
So Shantanu, can you just throw some light on what are the factors which went into Grofers' mindset, or when they decided to pivot? Like, what were the factors, except other than consumer profile, which went into making a decision? Because Grofers pivoted multiple times, as you mentioned. So, what were the key things when they considered?
See, whenever you're working with a lot of marketplace customers, you need to have certain sureties in place. We can take the example of Amazon. They're working with Amazon is the leader in marketplace across the world. But that having said that, they also keep certain articles of, let's say, bigger uh, marketplace merchants in their warehouses, so that the fill rate quality and could be maintained, the fill rate assurity could be maintained.
Correct.
And those were the challenges of Grofers in those days, that, though we were just a medium to connect the consumer and the shopkeeper, but still, if the shopkeeper is actually not providing us the fill rate, how are we going to give it to the consumer? And a very practical problem of that was, how are you going to get the right idea of the inventory that these guys have? One of the solutions is build a point of sale system at such a grand level and get it installed in all your merchants, which actually is one of the main criterias of Amazon and Flipkart, that you need to list your inventory on their point of sale system. But then we're talking about your friendly neighborhood store. He might not be that tech savvy. He might not have the will to do it, or he might already be using and invested in a POS product, and he does not want to double his work logging inventory at both the places. So one of the challenges that we faced was, how do you get the inventory at
Got
right time? Yeah. So talking about the growth aspect of India, yes, India in terms of internet growth is ranked just behind China. As of January 2020, we have 687 million internet users. Love or hate, you cannot deny the contribution that Jio brought into this on the table. Jio just catapulted the acquisition of people, and Jio's right now user base is close to 500 million, with close to like 300 million digitally active users. But when I say that this is a very good growth when it comes to internet growth in India, we are the second most populated country and all, we are still nowhere close to China, the type of internet penetration that China sees. When India was at, I tracked that numbers last year, when India was close to 500 million digitally active users, China was already over a billion digitally active users. And with that, you can actually see the way the Chinese companies are actually growing. Now, I don't want to get into the entire political part of this Chinese versus the rest of the things, but I think as product people, as startup enthusiasts, it is very important for us to observe what are the reasons that China sees an explosive exponential growth of things as compared to India. There are a lot of things which I'll further talk about how, and I'll also cite an example where a Chinese company has grown by leaps and bounds as compared to the transactions in the Indian ecosystem. So one of the companies that I've been always pretty fascinated with since the last 4 years is Pinduoduo, popularly known as PDD. I'm not sure if a lot of people here know about Pinduoduo. I'm just reading the question just. Okay, I'll come back to this marketplace question in a while, Piyush. Yeah, so Pinduoduo was actually doing 50 million orders a day. Yes, the number is right, 50 million orders a day in February 2020. And as of April, their numbers suggest that they are doing 65 million orders a day. Now, this number in itself sounds like, okay, they're doing 50 million orders a day. But let's compare it to certain companies in the Indian ecosystem. For example, you pick up any of the grocery service providers in the Indian ecosystem, be it Grofers, be it Big Basket, be it Flipkart Grocery, be it Amazon now. Largely, a lot of, and Pinduoduo started in the year of 2015. From 2015 to 2020, they've gone from 0 orders to 65 million orders a day. And if you see, let's say Big Basket's growth is also commendable. They're doing 3 lakh orders a day. There's no comparison of scale. And if you see the group buying program model, a lot of companies in India also started with the group buying thing. And a lot of companies have failed in it. So few of them are still trying to market it. And you see the scale here. 65 million orders is actually a very, very big number. So this is the scale we are talking about. This is the scale possibly Jio is also trying to achieve by getting in the next billion users. And whenever the internet industry talks about the fact that next billion users, everybody is also partly excited about the fact that India is the only country which is going to add like millions of users to the database. And that's where you see Facebook's main growth is actually coming from. Facebook is actually growing only in Latin America and India. And I'm not sure how many of you have also gotten a chance to look at the new Facebook UI. It's a very India-centric UI. They have gone from very clean UX and CX systems to a bit of chaotic ones. While when we build products, we often try to copy the American products. And that's why as product managers, as people who design UI and UX systems, we tend to get excited about cleaner user interfaces. But you see the example of TikTok. Maybe people in this subcontinent loves chaos. The growth of TikTok in itself is actually a case study. People, there is a village, there is a shepherd who's sitting in front of his goats and making a video. That's what the power of Jio and the power of TikTok has actually achieved. There are millions of content creators in this country, and there are millions of contents being created in India. Coming to media growth, while we all, I think we are still in very nascent stages of the entire entertainment, media, and video industry in India. This could be compared to the early 2009 and 2010 when e-commerce was actually taking shape in India. Right now, though, as cliched as it sounds, we don't know what this industry could be. We don't know what model actually would come out as the winning model in this. There are a lot of problems in the internet media thing, which I don't think are solved for now. For example, there are way different pricing models. Netflix has a lot of content when it comes to the world, but they're still struggling with a quality Indian content, versus Amazon Prime has different set of problems. And one problem which I particularly think is going to hit this industry very soon is there are so many OTT platforms coming in with their own set of fee and payments that it effectively becomes like a television industry, right? That you have to subscribe to HBO movies for HBO movies to actually, I mean, you pay, you start paying each of these channels, and that's where one of the challenges also comes, how we as part of this industry overcome that challenge and get the biggest pie in the next billion users that are actually being onboarded. As we speak, there are telecom companies going ahead in the remotest of Indian villages and enabling people with 4Gs and different internet plans. So let's come to talk about what are the product development barriers. Knowing the audience, knowing the competition, language literacy. So the first two parts, knowing the audience and knowing competition, it's easier said than done. When you start ahead, when you join a company, when you form a company, you have a basic frame in mind that who's the audience, who's going to use my product. But that basic frame and that basic understanding is, that's too personal. That's too personal an opinion for you to actually go ahead and build something on it. So I'll give you an example. When we were doing a pivot at Grofers, we always thought that Big Basket is our main competitor, and Amazon now and Flipkart, Grocery, and etc. But though they are one of the competitors, I don't deny that. But when you move to the SEC B, SEC C market, the value proposition completely differs. We realized in due course of time that we are trying to target the same consumers who are actually going to the DMarts of the world, which basically means that DMarts keep much limited inventory and channelizes their entire potential in saving the cost of for the consumer rather than giving him a convenience. We also realize that it's not always that if your shampoo you would order a shampoo and would want to get it in like an hour. People are largely okay with waiting for their product to arrive, provided they are able to save money. And like in the beginning of we were having some random chit chat, and Aditya and Yash also mentioned that the way Google Pay gamified the entire app experience. Also, if saving is not very important when it comes to your monthly budget, but still everybody gets cheap thrills in saving money. We as a race, we as a country, we don't believe in giving extra money to anybody. And why should we? And why shall we? Which basically means that the company needs to do every possible thing where you need to save money for the consumer. And suddenly, if you see that if your audience even shifts from B1, SEC B1 to SEC C1, you need to have like whole different set of options. You need to possibly change your consumer app. I'm not saying that you need to, maybe, but there's a lot of things that happen in the background. You need to now align your supply chain with a way that you actually save a lot of costs. Just a minute, I think save a lot of costs. You need to build products for picking, delivery, where you minimize costs and maximize the savings. And that's how, as a product manager, your decision, even if you're not working on the consumer app, largely depends on who your audience is. Who are you trying to sell it? Language and literacy is another interesting thing which is there for only Indian subcontinent. When you talk about China and all the growth that China has seen, they still speak Mandarin and they still read Mandarin in the entire country. But when you come to India, you have 30 mainstream languages being spoken. A lot of those people could speak those languages, but they can't read or write. And just imagine that right now we've just touched the tip of the iceberg, where I'm just talking about language and literacy. When you talk about different ethnicities and different cultures in different states, it's a whole different ball game. Few people in certain particular state might like actually a chaotic UI, versus certain ethnicities in India might prefer a more organized and clean UI. So how do you, as a product manager, or even a person who's trying to do business and trying to scale up or make up a product, overcome these challenges? The answer actually lies in what we want to learn. So in the next slide, I'm going to talk about minimum viable product. Eric Rice, in his book From Zero to One, has repeatedly, talked about minimum viable product. What is the minimum viable product, etc., etc. And I'm sure a lot of people here would have read that book. I would recommend that if you haven't read that book, it's actually a very interesting book which you should read. So the minimum viable product is I'm again going to repeat it, because I'll just dissect this definition and then I'll draw parallels of why this definition is important. The minimum viable product is that version of the new product which allows the team to collect the maximum amount of validated learnings about consumer with the least effort. Now, there are three main parts to it. It has to be a version of the new product. It's not that you want to do redo something which is already existing in the market. Even if you want to redo, let's say, certain consumer apps, but then you will have to get in some new service in the game. Maybe if you are into e-commerce, if you are into e-grocery, if certain company is giving actually savings, then maybe you get convenience in the game. Maybe you start delivering products and have an SLA of delivery within 30 minutes, within 1 hour. Minimum viable product allows the team to collect validated learnings about consumers. The goal of MVP is never to actually scale up the company. The goal of MVP is always for the product manager and for the team to learn what actually needs to be done. I'll sum this with an example. I'm sure a lot of people here would have actually read about it, that Uber, when they started in the US, they did not have any automated system. Right now, Uber is doing wonders in AI and the supply chain and the supply that they've built for the entire drivers, supply as well as demand, etc. But in the early days, they just wanted to validate, would people need a cab? Yes. And how do they did that validation? They made a consumer app. Whenever anybody placed an order or requested for a cab, that used to come down and get logged in a database or Excel of sorts. And somebody would call up the nearest driver and tell him or her to go and pick that guy up. Now, if you see, this is not a very pristine product, but it allowed Uber to learn that yes, people want it, and what people wanted in it, and what they wanted: savings, they wanted taxi, they wanted it fast, they didn't want it fast, they were even fine with scheduling it and using it later. There was a lot of learnings, and based on those learnings, the Uber's product team went back to the drawing board and then came up with a pristine product. Now, keep in mind that when they were actually doing this pristine product development, they did not let business come down. That we've learned this, now there is a gap of few months and then we'll come out with pristine product. In practicality, you don't have that luxury. That's why you might want to do the MVP with the least effort. Why the least effort? Because few people, faster execution, and lesser turnaround time. Validate your learnings, see what you want to learn from the product, come back to the drawing board, make it, and then go back again. Now, this MVP thing never actually ends in a product. you might be able to launch a product. Let's say Uber definitely launched an app, but then you might be coming up with a lot of new features. You need to do an MVP of the features. Would people want to track their loved ones who are in the taxi at real time? Wouldn't they want to track? Or there was an interesting thing that Uber actually launched, which was followed by other ride sharing apps as well, which is splitting the cost of the ride if you're riding with your friend. So these are the type of things that a product manager should be always ready with. And again, as I said in the previous slide, and I'm going back to it, what we want to learn. If you do not define what you want to actually learn from this product, then the game becomes pretty much a chicken and egg game, where the product manager keeps tweaking the same MVP that he has and keep waiting for certain numbers to rise, which actually does not rise or which actually does not fall. And please don't get me wrong here. It is absolutely fine for the product to fail as well, because that is also a learning from the product. Once you have done the learning, then you go back to engineering, then you go back to your user interface developers, consumer experience developers, do a lot of user personas, do a lot of user interviews, and then start shaping up the product. That's where the entire game of scaling a product comes in. Scaling a product, if you see, this is largely how a product like cycle is. You start with a prototype, and that becomes an MVP. Prototype is where you think that you could do that or not. Maybe your team can't actually do that, or the technological limitations of our current time are so that this could be done or couldn't be done. And then you move on to an MVP. MVP, then you validate the learnings here, then go back to the product market fit, do a lot of iterations, do a lot of user persona testings, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are intelligent enough and doing it on a day-to-day basis. But here I would want to, highlight a fact that which I always did as a guy who was looking into a product. But it's always good to stick what you want to learn in your cubicle on your desktop, so that what happens is, in a day-to-day chaos of product development, where you would be syncing up with the CRM team, the guy who's doing user interviews, the guy, your engineering teams, and obviously the founder and your boss, people forget what you want to learn. People forget what is your North Star metric. And you get too much caught up in just delivering this release and just attaining that deadline. Making world-class products is actually much more than that. I'm not saying that deadlines and release are not important to it, but in the back of your mind, you need to constantly keep asking yourself the question that what did I want to learn from this product? What is the timeline that I want to learn it in? And is this product helping me learn that? If the answer to this is no, this product is not helping you learn what you wanted to learn, maybe you picked up a wrong parameter to learn. So that is why, as a product manager, a lot of thought needs to go in for every feature, for every product, that what do you want to learn on it? And then when it comes to scaling a product, that whatever you've learned, how are you actually going to scale it up? What are the next steps? I've learned that people want a cheaper sugar. How are you actually what are going to be the next steps from there? What things that you could do to actually bring down the cost of goods that you're selling? Or let's say if you've learned that people want, let's say, faster deliveries faster. Here I would just want to highlight an old thing which I don't know, a lot of people might have forgotten. When Flipkart started in India, the only thing differentiating Flipkart from the other people who were selling books, yes, India Times and Rediff did sell books at that time. A lot of people might have forgotten about rediff.com, yes. And I was surprised to find out that this website still exists. Uh, they were selling books. Flipkart just said one thing. If while at the time of placing an order, I tell you 2 days, so it is indeed 2 days. You will get your product in 2 days. So all their technical edge, cutting edge, using more pristine techniques and technology, building up e-cart and a logistics arm from scratch was concentrated around the fact that whatever is the committed time frame, you get your product in that, and the rest is history. We see now all of us want products sitting at home. Again, I'm going back to the fact that know your audience. A lot of times I have seen that I was a lot of times very confident that, this is the guy we are trying to sell in, and e-commerce is for people, let's say a working couple who do not have time to go out and shop for basic needs. We try to sell a lot of general merchandise and grocery to them because they don't have time. They could order from anywhere. But suddenly, with the onset of Jio, your entire frame of reference is also shifting. Now there are a lot of your consumers whose basic goal is to actually save money. I was talking to somebody in one of the e-commerce and e-grocery space. I'll give you an anecdote that I won't name the company or the person who told me this. They were doing a lot of user interviews, and then they categorized a person in their database as a price agnostic or a discount agnostic person, which basically means that it really doesn't matter much to that person if I give a discount or if a product is highly priced or a low priced article. And that guy also has stopped placing a lot of orders from that company. And these guys then called him up, fixed up a time to meet him. And then they realized that what he was doing was he was using his app and his cart as a checklist. He was adding in products, whatever he needed to buy. And while coming back from work, he would stop at Chroma, he would stop at eZone, he would stop at Big Bazaar, he would stop at the Reliance Freshers of the world, and see if that product in his cart is available cheaper anywhere else. If it is available cheaper anywhere else, he would remove it from the cart and buy that product, which basically means that at the end, whatever order he placed were for products which were not on discount anywhere else. And that's where he summarized that if this is not on discount anywhere else, then I might as well get it from these guys because they'll anyways get the product till my door. Now, if you see the user personas and knowing the audience, people categorized him in the database as a price agnostic customer. But apparently, he was one of the highest category people who would actually get affected by discounts and prices. So that's where I say that it's easier said than done when you say that who's your audience. You'll have to find out through different sources. You'll have to do maybe one thing I always found good in startups is go through the entire operational process, even as a product manager, even as a part of the technology team. Sit with the CRM guy, take a couple of calls, go with your delivery boy, deliver a product, sit with your warehouse helper, try and pick stuff up. You will get their lifespan, you will get what consumer want, and that's how you'll move, possibly design better products. Coming to language here, in making products for Bharat, language is actually indeed a very big barrier. We consider that people would want to actually use your app or the consumer facing application in their vernacular language. But again, you need to validate it if that is the case in your category or not. And an interesting data that I came across recently in the present company is, while people love to hear news in their current or the regular vernacular language, but since most of the mobile phones have the default setting of English, actually people still type their vernacular language in English script, which basically means that is it even viable to actually give them their vernacular script in your consumer application, or people are too easy to, you know, write the same language in English, business English script. Again, for the third point, can we bypass languages with better cataloging and content? I take the example of Myntra. I think Myntra has done wonders with cracking the cataloging in this ecosystem. But again, the type of audience that Myntra is in, a lot of English is used there, and that's where it shows up in their app as well. But whenever you guys get a chance, download the Pinduoduo app. You will not get it in the Google Play Store. You will have to go to the PDD website and download their APK, install it, and see their product pages. It's sheer brilliance. You guys, a lot of us does not know Mandarin, and they've nullified the use of language when they're, you know, describing a product or a category. Hundreds and hundreds of photographs. If they're describing a jeans, there's a close-up photograph of the zip and the threading and the stitching. They've used cataloging to, you know, bypass the entire language barrier. When it comes to developing a product and scaling it up, even in the purview of minimum viable products, etc., speed is very important. You need to, what I found out, and that's my learning from an experience, you guys could have your own set of learnings there, that A/B experiments work wonderfully. But then again, you need to define before starting the A/B experiments what you want to learn from it. What is a control set? What is a test set? What are the different sets? And what numbers are we actually trying to see there? I am always a fan of minimizing the dependency on engineering teams when it comes to the A/B test and a lot of experiments that we're doing. I would also advise a lot of product folks to develop a self-sustainable way inside the product team where the dependency on engineering is not there. Why? Engineering takes a bit of longer time to develop a product. There is a lot of context switching involved on the product, on the features that they are working on, and what they want to actually build and deliver. Here, I would want to say that, you know, tools like MoEngage and CleverTap basically came in very, very handy. If you want to try out certain things for your user interfaces, you could use CleverTap, change the stuff, do a validated learning, then come back to the drawing board, engineering teams, and now you have a bigger case to actually build that thing. And in a lot of evolved organizations, a lot of times engineering would ask you to actually ask the question that why shall we make your product and not this product which we are working on? What is the business impact of it? And as a product manager, you need to develop your business skills to even measure those impacts. Again, do not forget that what you're learning and what you're tracking is very, very important. what things you are tweaking in the A/B experiments and what effects they are bringing in. That will actually, change change the way you will perceive your end product. Last but not the least, as product managers, you should always invest in a good business insights or an analytics guy. You will be juggling so many hats that uh, you might just wouldn't want to give so much time in analyzing the learnings and the data that is pouring in. If you have a helping hand of a good analytics guy, it always helps. And I, in my past organizations as well, have always advocated for a data analytics pod being assigned dedicatedly to the product team. It has its own benefits, and I would say that is not an expenditure, that's an investment. Another thing that that helped me a lot was the jobs to be done mentality, the jobs to be done methodology. This was developed. So I'll possibly explain this with the help of an example. Each of us in the pre-COVID world used to go to offices, and for going to office, the job to be done here is going to office. And then we use different ways and methods to actually go to office. Some people use the cab, some people use the train, some people use cycle. So your job to be done here is going to work. For doing that job, certain people have hired a car, which they bought. Certain people have hired an Ola or Uber, which they order every day. Certain people have hired the local trains and the local transport, and certain people have hired bicycle. Now your functional and emotional aspects come into it. The job is going to work, but you want a bit of comfort in it as well. And you don't mind spending some money on it. So you buy a car. But for certain people, going to work, they want a bit of comfort, but they don't want to spend a lot of money. They want the flexibility that they can leave work at 2 a.m. and come to work again at 11 a.m. So they might want to possibly invest in a motorbike. For a lot of other people, leaving and coming in as at fixed time, but savings is a very, very big issue. So they've hired a local transport. Whenever you as a product manager think in terms of jobs to be done and break it, it will always make your goal and the ways that you can achieve that goal very easy, and things will be more clearer. If you read stuff over jobs to be done on the internet, there's an interesting example that comes. Let's say you work for a lawnmower company, and the primary job of a lawnmower is to cut grass. But why do people want to buy a lawnmower? Maybe a lot of those people, the job that they want to get done by hiring lawnmower is keep the grass to a limited height. Then maybe the lawnmower is not the right answer to it. Maybe investing into hybrid grass seeds, which do not grow beyond a certain height, is the answer. I know that this is like a hypothetical world, but this is just an example that never shy away from thinking out of the box. And jobs to be done is actually a mentality which will enable you to think in terms of that. What is the job that the consumer wants to do? And what are his emotional and functional requirements for which he's hiring me to do that job? And how can I make this job much easier for him? Read about jobs to be done on YouTube. You will get like tons of reading material and as well as other material for it. And it's an interesting. Yes, you're right, Akash. McDonald's shakes are a very good case study for jobs to be done. Product releases and improvements I've anyways spoken about in product development, so I won't take a lot of your time. Since we are getting close to 3 o'clock, this is the last slide that I wanted to talk about is OKR and the experiments framework. I've been a very big fan of OKRs. OKR is Objective Key Reforms. Basically, you measure what matters is the book, which sums up OKRs wonderfully. And you guys, I would say that even as product managers, you guys should read about it. So what does largely an OKR say? OKR is basically, it trickles down from the top. Your founder generally defines top 3 or 5 objectives for the company, and then each of the functions and each of the person in the chain keeps defining their set of objectives. But the key point here is you need to do whatever you want to do in life, but if your work and objective and goal does not align with the company OKRs, then you're just wasting your time as well as the company's time. Give a reading about OKRs. It's actually a very interesting thing. A lot of things have been achieved using OKRs. IBM was the company who started developing this model, and then they saw a lot of benefits. Google still uses it. And I have personally used OKRs in my team, use jobs to be done to find out what your goals would be, refine them, have an OKR, break down those OKRs, trickle it down to the last member in your team, have weekly check-ins, see if and align if the efforts that you're doing in your day-to-day life are actually going and aligning with the objectives or not. Helps simplify your life as a product manager. Another thing, the rest of the 3 things I've anyways spoken about in the last part is pod-based model. Interestingly, pod-based models work for us in a lot of my previous orgs. What is a pod-based model? Let's say you have an objective, you have an OKR, and you want to, achieve a goal. Then different people from different departments and functions form a pod and start working towards that. You could get your marketing guy there, you can get your customer care guy, a user interviews guy there, and that's how you bring in speed in your experiment and the learning that you want to do from that experiment. That's pretty much what I wanted to say, guys. And yeah, I'll just Yash, I'll have a look at the questions if there are any.
Sure. I'll just moderate them for you.
Sure, please.
So firstly, thanks a lot, Shantanu, for sharing your learnings and insights.
Thank you all of us for listening me for an hour. Thank you.
No, actually, I have a few questions which I would love to ask you as well. But let's go with the audience questions first. So there's a question from PU. So are there any observations, suggestions that you have come across while building a marketplace business, which are applicable to even marketplace niches? So Grofers still operates in a big market. There are a lot of smaller niches who also operate. Any tips or suggestions for those marketplaces?
So basically, it depends on what business or category you operate in. Generally, the margins in the grocery play are so thin that if you want to operate for a very niche market, you will never be able to justify your operational cost for it. Your operational cost for delivering one order will be so high that you'll never be even able to break up on that, and the minimum order value that you would need from that niche category would be too high. A classic example is Godrej Nature's Basket. Godrej Nature's Basket always opens up in areas which are very SEC A1, but then we all know that Nature's Basket is also struggling in certain areas in terms of business.
Correct.
I don't know if I've correctly answered the question.
Yeah. So we have one recent question. So anything more you'd like to talk about the Nuge? What exciting things you're working on?
So in Nuge, we are trying to bridge the gap between giving good news and information and explainer content in vernacular. We're live in 8 Indian languages and counting. We're doing great stuff when it comes to technology and data science. We're using computer vision, where we are kind of trying to predict what the certain demography and what certain areas of that vernacular prefers to watch. We're breaking down the video frame by frame and using computer vision on to analyze things where the drop-off rate is maximum. At what point in the video does the user, prefer to comment it? What point in the video they share it? And we believe that this is a unique way which people have not looked at the video industry. I'm sure Netflix and the primes of the world would have their products built around computer vision, but a large ecosystem of startup would never get those products because they'll be too high in IPR for it.
Correct. So we have a question from Akash. So he's asking, shouldn't the UI UX be more a function of the type of product instead of just the users who will be using it?
That's actually correlated, right? The type of product and the user who's using it.
Yeah.
It's actually, it's a cyclic game.
True.
TikTok is a type of product, and the type of users who use it defines the type of product.
True. Correct. So yeah, so we have an interesting question from Anirudh also. So you mentioned something about group buying. So from your perspective, do you see apps supporting group buying in India as well? So how do you see, like how we see in China, how do you see the trend growing in India?
I think I might not be well versed with the business acumen of those industries when it comes to group buying. And to be very frank, Yash, I have not drilled deep into the business parts of it. So commenting anything without data would be too harsh on people who are actually working
Correct.
on that business model.
Correct. So one question I had, since you mentioned the user persona, which was different, like when they were studying, the user persona was different, the price agnostic customer. So any other inferences which you can share with us where like you need to look at things at a different lens to understand your product better? Because generally when we're building as managers or developers, we have a very set vision of how we want our products to look like, but generally the customer has a very different vision.
I have worked with, talking to a lot of customers in my previous 3 orgs who used to be major buyers and they dropped off. Another interesting case is, I'm not sure how many people here are well versed with the demography of Delhi. There's this gentleman in Delhi, he was a Sardarji, and he used to be our major buyer, and we reduced discounts, and that's when he stopped buying. And obviously on the database, he's just a name and a number, and we wanted to meet him. That it's been like months since you placed an order. Said, yeah, we come over to our home and I'd love to host you, etc. We went there to meet him. If owning a car defines the socioeconomic status that you are in, then he had 2 5 Series and a 3 Series BMW.
Wow.
And I was actually shocked, and I asked him this question, that since there are 3 BMWs standing outside your gate, I don't think that you need discounts. I don't think that you really need those discounts to keep buying stuff. And for that, he said that, I started my career as a tailor here in this locality. And from there, I have actually reached the heights of an importer-exporter of garments. So still, for myself, I would want to indulge in a bit of restaurants and drinking only when I have saved that money from the basic buying that I do for my family. Here it was an important learning that there is this guy whose revenue and turnover is in crores. He drives a BMW, but still saving is such an important thing. Everybody wants to save money when they want to buy, even if it is a couple of rupees. So do not assume things. Always go an extra mile when it comes to user interviews, user persona. And my personally, whenever I join any company, even at senior level, I would want to, see the entire chain of it. If I was supposed to join, let's say Amazon, I would really request that I would want, and trust me, Amazon does that, that they will place you for a couple of days right from customer care up till the consumer's door. So you could get an idea of how services are.
I think in Disney is one of those companies which does follow those things, because knowing the customer at the base level gives you more learning than any Excel sheet can provide.
Yeah, I mean, uh, as product managers, I think when you guys when we all get too engrossed in the execution game, we forget our main duties of learning as well.
True.
And that learning will always be outside your cubicle. It
Correct.
will not be with the engineering teams and the UI UX teams.
Correct. So so what happens? So when you're just starting out, when you're a small team, there is also a possibility that you would not have a dedicated data or an insights team. So what does a PM need to do? Like, what skills does he need to attain during that time? This is a question by Nitin.
Nitin, this is a very interesting question. I think one thing that I took the liberty of assuming was the startup or the company that you're working in has resources, and they're liberal enough to give you a business analytics guy as well. But there's no easy answer to it. As a PM, you will have to fix time to analyze data, to fish out data. All now product managers come from various different fields. You could be a completely non-techie and still be a very good PM, but it is always good to brush up your SQL, to brush up your Excels, to brush up your database skills. That will always come in handy, because when no engineer has time to actually help you to extract the data from the databases, if you know SQL, you can do it yourself. When you don't have the liberty of having a data analytics guy, maybe you can find a couple of hours in a day and use your fingers to extract and do a lot of data mining on that Excel sheet. So I think though it sounds very tiresome, but basic wireframing, SQL, database, and Excel skills, all the product manager, if they know, it's always a good thing to have.
True. True. I think that adds a lot of value to you when you be a product manager. So we have a follow-up question regarding your answer on the user persona at the Nuge. So anything you can share, like, because it's a non-English speaking community. So any insights which you could share while interacting with the Nuge users, something on those lines?
So basically, the only thing that we're still trying to learn a lot of things. This is non-English speaking. Yes, the non-English speaking user, a lot of times the way the media industry is kind of built in our country is, let's take the example of Maharashtra and somebody staying in a small village in the Aurangabad district. He will get a lot of Marathi content, news, information, and explainers, but that would largely be for his state. That would largely be for his city and his, district. A lot of these non-English speaking users, even from smallest villages, are actually interested to know what is happening in Delhi, what is happening in Bengal, what is happening in Europe. So slowly but steadily, when you see television, a lot of vernacular channels are there, but there still is a vacuum when it comes to global information in vernacular.
Yeah, agreed. So I think we're almost done with the questions, so we can end the session. So thanks again, Shantanu, on behalf of the entire community for taking time and sharing your insights with us. So this was a very practical session where we learned the things which a product manager actually needs to do versus frameworks and theories. So thanks again for joining us today.
I'm glad, Yash and Adit, for giving me this opportunity, and I'm thankful that you guys liked it.
Thanks.
Thanks, Shantanu.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.